He expresses confidence in China's ability to reach carbon neutrality ahead of schedule.
I'm totally convinced that China will be able to reach neutrality well before 2060.
He commends China's substantial contribution to global governance.
China has been playing a fundamental role in the international discussions.
He acknowledges China's dedication to helping developing countries achieve shared progress.
Well, China has been a key protagonist of development.
Jorge Moreira da Silva, Executive Director of the United Nations Office for Project Services, speaks exclusively with Leaders Talk.
Hello and welcome to Leaders Talk, where we meet leaders, thinkers, and trailblazers. I'm Guan in Beijing. In this episode, we sit down with Mr. Jorge Moreira da Silva, the Executive Director of the United Nations Office for Project Services. As extreme weather events intensify around the world and global conflicts continue to spread, the world is facing unprecedented challenges. As the head of a UN agency focused on delivering projects on the ground, how does he view the link between climate change, peace, and development? And how does he interpret China's growing role in global governance? Here's our conversation. Undersecretary General da Silva, welcome to Beijing, China. You visited China in multiple capacities as Minister for Portugal, as your capacity working for OECD, and now with UNOPS. Maybe to start with, I would like to ask you to tell us a bit about this organization to our average viewers. UNOPS, United Nations Office for Project Services.
Thank you, Mr. Guan. It's a pleasure to be with you in this occasion. So UNOPS is the operational branch of the UN. So we are just doing implementation. If you compare us with other UN agencies, some of them do a fantastic job on norms, on policies, on programming, on planning. That's not our task. Our task is implementing projects on the ground. We are the engineers. We implement projects on the ground.
You are an engineer by training.
Infrastructure, procurement, project management. We build hospitals, schools, energy facilities, renewable energy, energy transmission lines, roads. We procure medicines. So we are really on the ground, particularly with the focus supporting those most in need, the difficult places.
But there are so many difficult places as we speak, and I would assume that these are distressing times. If you look at the conflict zones whereby UNOPS operate a lot, and the humanitarian relief that is needed for peacekeeping infrastructure and facilities, how do you look at the situation? How would you describe the challenges that your organization currently faces, given all the geopolitical tensions and rivalries?
We are really living very difficult times. 25% of the people in the world live under conflict. We have not witnessed this proliferation of conflict since the World War II. So it's very impressive, the proliferation of conflicts and violence, and also very worried with the fact that some of these conflicts became forgotten. So it's compounded crises that are just having one crisis on the top of the other. There is a high concentration or correlation, almost correlation between conflict, fragility, and climate. In the exact same places where people are facing the impact of the floods or the droughts, the cyclones and the hurricanes, it's exactly the same places where people are under conflict and war. And therefore, we need to do more, much more, to support the people from a perspective that is prevention always, humanitarian as needed, and development wherever possible. We really need an approach, an ambitious approach on solidarity, bringing peace, bringing stability, but also fostering sustainable development.
Since its founding in 1945, the United Nations has witnessed 8 decades of profound transformation. From the ashes of war emerged a global multilateral system, tested time and again, yet unwavering in its mission to uphold peace and foster development. Over the past 80 years, the UN has worked to resolve conflicts, deliver humanitarian assistance, build essential infrastructure, and advance the Sustainable Development Goals. From war-torn cities to drought-stricken lands, from makeshift hospitals to refugee camps, UN staff have brought hope to those in need. They build schools, repair hospitals, deliver medicine, and pave roads, reviving communities once reduced to rubble. Now, the UN stands at a critical crossroads, a breakdown or a breakthrough moment. As Jorge Moreira da Silva puts it, the choice has never mattered more.
Undersecretary General, you raised a very important correlation, perhaps a few people have given a thought on, that is the correlation between susceptibility to climate-induced disasters and countries and regions already in war and conflicts. Why? Or what's behind such a correlation?
Well, I think that climate exacerbates fragility, and without resilience, countries cannot foster development. So the more resilient are the countries, the stronger they will be building development. So there is a correlation between climate and development. But then there is also a correlation between peace and development. It's impossible to foster development in a country during war and during conflict. So these three dimensions, that is not exactly a correlation, but is the simultaneous impacts on climate and on wars on the same countries, is particularly worrying because it's exacerbating the pain and the suffering. It's very unfair. It's very unfair also because most of these countries are not the countries that emit most. And therefore, we really need a call on solidarity. Those countries can't address conflict, fragility, climate impacts without global solidarity and without cooperation. And I would say it's in our interest, in everyone's interest, because we live in an interdependent world. Imagine that China or Europe or the US becomes carbon neutral tomorrow. That's not the plan, but imagine that they will become carbon neutral tomorrow. It won't fix the problem, because emissions in developing countries, in the global south, will continue growing if those countries are not supported. Why? Can you tell an African country or an African continent where you have 700 million people without access to electricity and 1 billion people without access to clean water, 2.4 billion people without access to sanitation, 1 billion people that goes to bed every day without a decent meal? Can you ask them to go green, same time that they are trying to fight poverty and to protect their people without additional financial resources? It's impossible. So I think that it's fundamental from ethical and moral reasons to support developing countries, but it's also in the interest of everyone, because the climate crisis is a global crisis. It doesn't make much sense that we go totally green in one part of the world if the other part of the world will not be able to go towards this green and low carbon trajectory. And that's why it's in everyone's interest to strengthen solidarity and cooperation. We all remember what happened during the pandemic. We said nobody is safe until everyone is vaccinated. With climate, it's the same. We can be the greenest in one country, but if we don't support other countries on the green trajectory, we won't get a good response to climate change. So I really hope that everyone in the world understand that the climate crisis is a global crisis, and we won't be safe unless everyone has had the chance to go towards this trajectory. And some countries, some developing countries, are lagging behind. And they are struggling with the multiple challenges, not just climate, but also war, conflicts, poverty. So I think it's really a fundamental moment, as you said. Multilateralism, it's living its defining moment, a breakdown or a breakthrough moment. Either we break through, embracing an ambitious agenda, more ambition, more commitment, more solidarity, more peace, or we risk further exacerbating inequalities and widening the gap between the North and the South.
We're marking the 80th anniversary of course, the founding of the United Nations that pretty much kept the world united, although there have been fragmentation. How do you look at the role of China, which has been a founding member of the United Nations 80 years ago? all the way through today, where it has been perceived as a leader of the global south and a contributor to global development?
Well, China has been playing a fundamental role in the international discussions. We have, in this conversation, already mentioned several elements from climate to development. I think that the commitment of China on multilateralism is key. The world needs more global coordination and reinforcement of multilateralism. So I think that this approach is fundamental, and obviously China plays a vital role. Many
economists and historians and policymakers, so-called policy elites, commentators, they comment on the current world order. From the point of view as a developmental economist and engineer, of course as the chief of UNOPS, I'm just wondering what would be your perspective on the future of a new world order. What should it look like? What kind of interests should it take into account going forward?
I think that the new order is an order that should be framed by the UN values and principles. It still makes sense to pursue the UN values and principles, the UN Charter. I think that the new order, or this order, must keep always peace and the people at the center. But also the sustained development concept, it's probably the best way to approach this, the dilemmas we face. We are living in a poly-crisis context. We are really living in an era where the challenges have been compounding. That's why some scientists even call it a poly-crisis context. If you take a look of what has happened in the last 5 or 6 years, we see a refugee crisis, we saw a pandemic, we see climate conflicts, trade tensions, and therefore this is one crisis after the other. This is a moment where all governments, all states should provide a response where we will say the here and the now is not good enough. What I mean is the following: a response that is just about today and not thinking about the next generations. Policies that are not good enough to respond not only to the current problems, but also to the future problems, are not aligned with the needs. But also policies that are just about here and not here and there, I mean policies that are just good enough for a specific country, but will not contribute to the global development, obviously will make more difficult to establish sustainable development globally. That's why I think that UN is still a fantastic concept, because the United Nations is the United Nations. It's not the Secretariat of the United Nations. This is a members-led organization. It's not a members-managed organization. The management is the Secretariat. It's Secretary General and it's all of us leading agencies. But really, it's the political will of the countries that matter. They are the shareholders. It's a members-led organization. So what I really hope is in a moment where we are facing is essential crisis, war, conflicts, poverty, climate, I hope that all United Nations will recommit with this project of peace and development.
Talking about cooperation with China, what do you hope to achieve by meeting with your Chinese counterparts and talking with relevant agencies and departments during your stay here in China this time around?
Well, China has been a key protagonist of development. China has been supporting developing countries in many continents, including in Africa, partnering to support them on development. The Global Development Initiative, Belt and Road Initiative are just examples of commitment from China in partnering with developing countries. At the same time, UNOPS is partnering with developing countries, with donors, with multilateral development banks, and with other UN agencies, precisely to support developing countries on infrastructure.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives. new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
In the global fight against climate change, China is making steady strides toward its goals, peaking carbon emissions before 2030 and achieving carbon neutrality before 2060. Confronting this challenge that affects all of humanity, China champions cooperation, mutual benefit, and shared progress. While advancing its own green transition, China is also bringing certainty and hope to a world in flux. China is fast emerging as a driving force in global green development.
I think that there is an important contribution that we all must provide in support of the 2030 agenda. Let's not forget the 2030 agenda is not an environmental agenda. It's a sustainable development agenda which is about economic, environmental and social dimensions, and we must address this in a moment we are off track. I think that it's important to speak the truth. Today, in 2025, only 17% of these 17 SDGs that were signed in 2015, only 17% are on track. We are in reverse mode in 30%, and 2030 is tomorrow. So we need to rescue the SDGs. At the same time, the other key pillar of the 2030 agenda was the climate agreement, the Paris Agreement. And we all agreed, all nations agreed, to commit to reduce emissions at home and to partner with other nations to help them reducing emissions in ways that will put us in a pathway to limiting the increase of temperature to 1.5 degrees. But today, if you take all the commitments from member states, we are in a path not to 1.5, but to 2.6 to 2.9 degrees. And let's not forget that 1.5 degree is not a technocratic or a political target. It's a physical limit. If we don't succeed on the 1.5 degrees, we will have massive impacts on the ecosystems, on the people, on the planet. And finally, we are off track on solidarity. Because what the numbers tell us is that developing countries are missing every year $4 trillion to implement SDGs. So we agreed on the SDGs, but developing countries are missing $4 trillion every year. We'll get in Belém do Pará, by the end of the year, COP30 on climate. And it's the moment where the world must respond. Are we fixing our national targets and our solidarity to ensure that we'll reach the 1.5 degree? Or are we pursuing in a complacent manner towards 2.9 degrees? This is the moment of truth. We have to answer to these questions. So I hope that with the China commitment on development cooperation and on climate and on the green agenda, we can all pursue towards the highest ambition. I want to recall that China has made very significant efforts on renewable energy, on electrical mobility. This shows that it is possible to go green and to generate jobs and economy. China is doing this domestically, but is also doing this in partnership with developing countries.
You talk about the 1.5 degree being seriously off track. That is a very grave concern. And you also said 1.5 degree is a physical limit. I was struck by that statement. Can you elaborate on why you said that?
If we go towards 2.9 degrees rather than 1.5, we will get 1.3 billion people in the world that will live in places that became deserts or under significant water stress. We'll have massive destruction of ice sheets. We'll have massive destruction of the stability of the climate. We'll have proliferation of hurricanes and cyclones. So the 1.5 degree, I insist, is a physical limit. If we cross that limit, we'll still be in this planet, but the planet will be different in terms of well-being, in terms of quality of life, in terms of health, but we can still fix it. In the last decade, investment on renewable energy has doubled. Solar and wind is now the cheapest energy in the world. Cheapest, solar and wind. Electrical mobility have been doubling or tripling every year, namely here in China, but also in Europe, also in the US. In China, it has been tripling, so going even further. It shows that the renewable energy or the electrical mobility is no longer a green agenda. It makes sense from an economic point of view. The number of jobs that can be created are massive through the green energy. The International Energy Agency says that with the energy efforts to reach neutrality by 2050, we will get a significant increase in jobs even by 2030. We will get 4 times more jobs on renewable energy. So I think that this is why I'm quite optimistic. I'm optimistic regarding the technology. I'm optimistic regarding the economics. I'm only worried with 2 dimensions: speed and solidarity. Our point is not just about the path, it's about the pace. Even when we are going the right direction, are we going fast enough? I don't think so.
Chinese President Xi Jinping made a priority for China to go green, and he launched this grain campaign ever since he took the leadership of China more than 10 years ago. He famously said, "Green mountains and clear waters are mountains of gold and silver." That is, of course, a translation. It's a metaphor of saying that a good ecology, good environment are invaluable. And since then, China really launched this nationwide campaign to go green, producing the largest number of lithium battery electric vehicles. Can I get a comment from you on China's, of course, policy directive, also ambition, also a grassroots support of going green?
Well, I'd like to praise President Xi for his vision and for his commitment on climate and on development, because indeed what China has succeeded in the green economy with the promotion of renewable energy and electrical mobility has been very important for the country, but also broadly, but also the commitment on multilateralism and on the 2030 agenda and on the climate agenda. I'm totally convinced that China will be able to reach neutrality well before 2060, because all the efforts that you have been making and the results that you have been reaching on renewable energy and on sustainability gives us clear signals, and that will be very important for the world.
President Xi Jinping of China proposed the Belt and Road Initiative in September 2013. How do you see the synergy, the alignment of China's Belt and Road Initiative proposed by President Xi and the projects, the principles of your organization, UNOPS, at the United Nations?
I think that the fact that the Belt and Road Initiative is focused on infrastructure is important. I think that the fact that those initiatives are being developed, namely the Belt and Road Initiative, which is having a huge impact in partnership with developing countries, is important, particularly because the focus is infrastructure. And I'm going to share with you 2 numbers that shows how this can be important, because we are an agency that is very committed to infrastructure, so we know what we are talking about. 92% of the Sustainable Development Goals depend on infrastructure, which means that if we don't get the right infrastructure on water, sanitation, energy, transportation, we will not succeed on the 2030 agenda. So the infrastructure is key, is a sine qua non condition. The same on climate. 82% of today's greenhouse gas emissions are related with infrastructure. So putting infrastructure at the center of development makes sense. I know that I can say this because the UNOPS is about infrastructure, procurement and infrastructure, but I would say that the numbers show that it's quite relevant for everyone. So the Belt and Road Initiative is focused on infrastructure, and that's why I think that the partnership between an agency like UNOPS, that is an agency of engineers on the ground doing infrastructure, and the partnership between China and developing countries on infrastructure is a fruitful partnership that I'm sure that will be pursued even further in the future.
Mr. Jorge da Silva, thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guan.
In our conversation, Mr. Da Silva spoke highly of China's efforts in sustainable development and green transition. He emphasized, though, that in the face of global crises such as climate change, the only path forward lies in strengthening cooperation and coordination, supporting one another, and respecting every country's right to development. And that will do it for this edition of Leaders Talk. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. I'll see you again next time.